Hey ho, everyone. Welcome back to Freud's Funky Findings podcast. In the last episode, we discussed the biography and some of the most famous theories of one Sigmund Freud. If you've already listened to that one, you may view this episode as, for one, the continuation of the last episode, but also as your reward, because this is where the fun begins. The plan is that we'll address a final, highly controversial theory of Freud and have a look at what contemporary psychology says about his most prominent ideas. Ready? All right, off we go. So, besides the use of hypnosis, the unconscious, the id, ego, and superego, free association, and dream interpretation, Freud's next hot take, in all senses of the word, was dividing human life into phases of psychosexual development. According to Freud, the oral stage, ages 0 to 1, pleasure is centered on the mouth through sucking and eating. In the anal stage, ages 1 to 3, focus shifts to control over bowel movements linked to autonomy and discipline. In the phallic stage, ages 3 to 6, children become aware of their genitals and direct unconscious desires towards the opposite sex parent. In the latency stage, ages 6 to 11, sexual interests are largely dormant, while societal and cognitive skills develop. Finally, in the genital stage, from puberty onward, sexual impulses mature and are directed toward partners outside the family. What was new here was Freud's claim that childhood is not a passive period of innocence, but a dynamic stage of psychological conflict, often involving sexual desires. He argued that our adult behavior is deeply rooted in these early experiences. Within the phallic stage, Freud described the famous Oedipus complex. In boys, this manifests as attraction to the mother and jealousy toward the father, accompanied by castration anxiety, which is resolved through identification with the father. So basically, the dad goes from the enemy who wants to castrate the son to buddy to watch the football with. In girls, Freud suggested a parallel process, sometimes called the electrocomplex, in which the girl feels desire for her father and rivalry with her mother. This, according to Freud, is the result of the girl realizing that she has no penis, blaming her mother for this alleged castration. Resolution here comes through identification with the mother. So she goes from being the psycho chick who stole the daughter's penis to the gal to pluck your eyebrows with. Freud saw the successful overcoming of the Oedipus complex as crucial for the development of personality and stable gender identity. Okay, with that, we've completed the presentation of Freud's most famous ideas. Now, let's examine how his theories and practices are holding up against the stringent standards of the 21st century. First off, the use of hypnosis. So today, hypnosis is no longer seen as a direct gateway into the unconscious, as Freud believed. Today, it's seen as a practice comparable to meditation, but with the difference that the therapist guides the patient from a trance state towards a specific goal, like, for example, pain reduction or anxiety and habit control. However, hypnosis doesn't reliably produce the favorable outcomes for everyone, and questions remain about how lasting the effects are, as well as what mechanisms underlie them exactly. So Freud's suggestion that hypnosis reveals hidden, unconscious material gets partial support, but many of his claims go beyond what the evidence supports today. Now, another thing that has to be mentioned here is that the term hysteria, which Freud used diagnosing patients whose symptoms couldn't be explained by physical conditions, is no longer accepted by the scientific community today. The term comes from the Greek hystera, meaning womb, reflecting the belief in ancient Greece and Rome that a wandering uterus caused women's emotional and physical symptoms. In the Middle Ages, apparent symptoms of this curious condition were thought to be linked to witchcraft or demonic possession. In the 18th and 19th centuries, hysteria became a common medical and psychiatric label applied almost exclusively to women, reinforcing the back then widely accepted idea that they were irrational and overly emotional. Thinkers like Charcot and Freud studied it, and Freud even argued that men can get hysteria too, but ultimately it remained kind of a vague catch all category, still mostly associated with women. Today, our understanding is that symptoms of what was considered hysteria are caused by other disorders. These could be anxiety, somatic symptoms disorder, where patients put an extreme emphasis on benign physical symptoms causing major emotional distress, or functional neurological disorder, which can cause one's brain to misfire, so to send wrong information toward the rest of the body, and can thereby disrupt our senses and movements. And in contrast to Freud's time, today, of course, we know that all of the above can occur in both men and women. Okay, on to the idea of the conscious, preconscious, and subconscious. Modern neuroscience agrees with Freud that a large part of mental activity occurs outside of conscious awareness, but it explains this a bit differently. Freud's divisions of the mind consist of conscious awareness, easily recalled memories, and repressed thoughts that are socially unacceptable but continue to influence behavior without awareness. Today, scientists describe unconscious mental activity in terms of implicit cognition and automatic processing. Implicit cognition refers to mental processes that influence thoughts or behavior without conscious control, such as forming prejudice or learning a new skill like riding a bike. Automatic processing refers to actions that occur effortlessly and without attention, like reacting quickly to a traffic light or recalling how to ride a bike. Neuroscience supports these ideas, showing that brain areas like the amygdala can process emotional and perceptual information without awareness. This confirms that the mind has different layers of activity, but while Freud created a sort of meta psychological model, scientists today more so explain the mind through brain and cognitive processes rather than repression or psychoanalytic theory. As an extension of Freud's structural model of the mind, he proposed that human behavior is the result of conflict between three parts: the id, pursuing primitive desires, the superego, acting as our moral campus, and the ego, the rational self, that mediates between the id and the superego. Contemporary research does not support these as literal brain structures, but many psychologists still find this model useful as a metaphor to explain internal conflict. For example, the tension between immediate urges and long term goals can resemble the id ego superego balance. Okay, next we have Freud's method of free association, his breakthrough technique in psychoanalysis. Today, free association is still used in psychodynamic, also known as talk therapy, and is recognized as a method to help people explore thoughts and feelings they might otherwise avoid. However, it has not been strongly supported through empirical research in the way more structured, evidence based, and goal oriented therapies, like, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy, have. Actually, many consider free association to be the foundation of most modern day talk therapy approaches. Moving on, we shall explore what current research says about the origins of the Freudian slip. So, modern cognitive psychology confirms that much of our mental processing happens outside of awareness. Things like biases, habits, and emotional reactions often occur without conscious intention. In this sense, Freud was ahead of his time. However, most speech errors are now understood as results of linguistic or memory based processing mistakes, not necessarily signs of suppressed emotions emerging from our unconscious. While some slips might reveal emotional tension, not all errors have deep meaning. Sometimes the slip is just a slip. Another phenomenon that has been topic of modern day psychology for a while now is dreaming. Freud believed that dreams express unconscious wishes and thoughts as their latent content, and that dream symbols hide true meaning through processes like condensation, displacement, and representation. Modern neuroscience agrees that dreams are related to our emotions and memories, and that they help us process daily experiences, regulate mood, and consolidate memory. But there is little evidence for the idea that every dream hides a specific repressed desire or that certain symbols have certain universal meanings. Therefore, dream interpretation isn't viewed to be as relevant or revelatory in modern day therapy approaches as it was for Freud. And last on the chopping block, we have the theory you've been all waiting for me to criticize, the stages of psychosexual development. So Freud argued that human behavior and personality are primarily driven by sexual instincts, with development unfolding through psychosexual stages, and that unresolved conflicts in these stages shape adult neuroses. In contrast, current research suggests that sexual desires generally emerge and become a relevant motivating force from puberty onwards. Behavior in general, but especially during early childhood years, rather arises from social, cognitive, emotional, and environmental factors, areas Freud largely neglected in this theory. So, the theory of the stages of psychosexual development lacks empirical support and overemphasizes sexuality as the root of all behavior. As for the Oedipus complex, my personal, very scientific comment here would be that, um, well, I don't know about you, but for me personally, me blaming my mom for taking my male parts wasn't the main issue growing up. I did, however, blame her for not teaching me how to fly, which was something I only really gave up on at the age of 12. Okay. In addition, Freud's ideas about sexuality were obviously shaped by the societal norms of his time. So his theories often portrayed women in passive or lesser roles, such as the idea of the penis envy, which has been strongly criticized by feminist scholars and modern psychologists. Many now view these ideas as culturally biased and outdated. That said, Freud's core insight that early childhood experiences matter remains a key principle in modern psychology. His detailed observation of child development, though they led him to some weird, unorthodox conclusions, from today's point of view, suggested to his field to take children's inner lives seriously, something modern day psychology views as crucial. Now, you might have started to notice that I'm already making the transition from the criticisms directed at Freud to his legacy because my high school English teacher hammered into my brain that you have to make a sandwich of positive things, then negative things, and then positive things again when giving someone feedback, which, aside from making you hungry, is supposed to make sure you don't offend the person who gave the presentation. Um, this, I suppose, is how I always received the closing compliment that I had a nice, secure stance, which made me very confident about my posture for a while until I realized that this was just the other positive breath slice for my feedback sandwich. Well, contrary to that, you don't have to make much of an effort to appreciate Freud's legacy. His students and successors both challenged his ideas and developed them further. Carl Jung, for example, originally a close collaborator, introduced analytical psychology, exploring concepts like the collective unconscious, archetypes, and individuation, while Freud focused on personal drives rooted in childhood and sexuality. Jung extended this idea to include universal symbols and myths that shape the human psyche across cultures. This led the way into general psychology, which is actually one of my subjects at uni. Then we have Alfred Adler, who broke away to create individual psychology, arguing that human behavior is driven by striving for superiority and the need to overcome feelings of inferiority, and less by sexual conflict. He also highlighted the role of social interest, our sense of belonging, and contribution to society in mental health. Today, these topics can be found in differential and social psychology, two other subjects I take as a 21st century psychology student. And then, of course, we have Anna Freud, his daughter, who became a leading figure in child psychoanalysis. She elaborated on her father's theories of the id, ego, and superego, and the personal development of children, and helped shape modern approaches to developmental psychology and therapy. Freud's work also had an impact on literature, art, film, and philosophy. In art, for example, Salvador Dali's The Persistence of Memory and René Magritte's The Lovers reflect Freudian ideas of dreams and the unconscious. In film, of course, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and Luis Buñuel's Un Chien Andalou explore repression, desire, and the irrational. In literature, it is suggested that James Joyce's Ulysses and Virginia Woolf's Mr. Dalloway and Franz Kafka's The Trial echo Freud's emphasis on inner conflict and hidden motives. In philosophy, Herbert Marcuse's Eros and Civilization and Jacques Lacan's Écrit reinterpret Freud's ideas about desire, repression, and language. So his ideas about dreams, sexuality, and the unconscious have really become ingrained in modern culture and thought. Okay, sandwich making complete. That was all I had to say about Sigmund Freud. I don't know if there's a world record for how many times one pronounces the name Freud organically within the span of 20 minutes, but I have the impression I might be a contender in either this or the last episode. Um, anyway, I hope this gave you an idea about today's perspective on the works of, oh wait, what was his name again? Anyway, the man we've been talking about. Until next time, take care. Boys, leave your dads alone, and girls, let your moms be. And we'll hear from each other soon. Bye bye.